I'm going to get into these indictments. We're going to read them together. I'm going to start with the superseding indictment first. United States District Court, Northern District of Illinois, Eastern Division, United States of America versus El Chapo, El Mayo, Vicente, Alfredillo, Alfredo Compadre, Juancho, Helman Olivares, Felipe, Tomás Arevalo Renteria, Pedro Flores, and Margarito Flores. In or about May 2005, and continuing until at least on or about December 1st, 2008, in Chicago in the Northern District of Illinois, Eastern Division, and elsewhere. El Chapo, El Mayo, Vicente, Alfredo, Alfredillo, the twins, Germán, Felipe, Tomás. Defendants herein did conspire with each other and with others known and unknown to the grand jury, knowingly and intentionally, to possess with intent to distribute and to distribute controlled substances, namely 5 kilograms or more of mixtures and substances containing a detectable amount of brocaine, a Schedule II narcotic. I gotta find a new letter to start the word narcotic with. Rug, controlled substance, and 1 kilogram or more of mixtures and substances containing a detectable amount of heroin. Overview of the conspiracy. Number 2, it was a part of the conspiracy that defendants El Chapo and El Mayo each directed factions of brocaine and heroin rug trafficking organization in Mexico, commonly known to its members and its associates as the Sinaloa Cartel. The faction of the Sinaloa Cartel directed by Chapo was the Guzman Loera faction, and the faction of the cartel directed by Mayo was the Zambada Garcia faction. The Zambada Garcia faction coordinated the narcotics trafficking activities with each other, with other factions of the Sinaloa Cartel and with other affiliated cartels in an alliance commonly known to their members and associates as the Federation. At times during the conspiracy, the Federation, including a narcotics traffic alliance among the Chapo faction and the Mayo faction of the cartel, and among others, Arturo Beltran Leyva, who also directed a brocaine and heroin rug trafficking organization in Mexico, commonly known to its members and its associates, as well as to the public as the Beltran Leyva cartel. In approximately early 2008, a split occurred between the Chapo faction and the Mayo faction of the cartel on the one hand, and the Beltran Leyva cartel on the other. This split resulted in the Beltran Leyva cartel ending its alliance with the Chapo faction and the Mayo faction of the cartel and the rest of the Federation. Since this split, the Chapo faction and the Mayo faction and their allies on the one hand, and the Beltran Leyva cartel and its allies on the other, became engaged in a violent war in Mexico over various issues, including control of lucrative narcotics trafficking routes into the United States and the loyalty of wholesale narcotics customers, including but not limited to defendants Pedro Flores and Margarito Flores, the Flores brothers. Number 4, it was further part of the conspiracy that Chapo and Mayo and members of Chapo's faction and Mayo's faction controlled by them coordinated their narcotics trafficking activities to import multi-ton quantities of brocaine from Central and South American countries, including Colombia and Panama, to the interior of Mexico. Chapo and Mayo and members of Chapo and Mayo's faction controlled by them coordinated the unloading of multi-ton shipments of brocaine in Mexico and coordinated the transportation and storage of these shipments within Mexico. Chapo and Mayo and their gangs, controlled by them, coordinated their narcotics trafficking activities to smuggle multi-ton quantities of brocaine, generally in shipments of hundreds of kilograms at a time, as well as multi-kilogram quantities of heroin, from Mexico across the United States border and then into and throughout the United States, including Chicago, Illinois, and elsewhere. Can you say Shaw City? Number 5, it was further part of the conspiracy that the Flores brothers and their associates, collectively the Flores crew, operated a wholesale cocaine and heroin distribution organization that distributed thousands of kilograms of brocaine and multi kilogram quantities of heroin in Chicago, Illinois area and elsewhere. The Flores brothers obtained substantial quantities of cocaine and heroin from the Chapo and Mayo faction of the cartel. Members of the conspiracy. Number 6. It was further part of the conspiracy that defendant Chapo was a leader of the Sinaloa cartel and was the head of the Chapo faction and was ultimately responsible for its operation. Chapo obtained and negotiated the price for multi-ton quantities of cocaine from Central and South American countries, including Colombia and Panama, and directed and arranged the transportation of multi-kilogram quantities of cocaine and heroin from the interior of Mexico to the United States border, then into and throughout it. So they're just repeating it, but they're just putting everybody's name in it. Boom, we repeat the same thing there for Mayo, number 7. Same thing for Mayo, and it's the same thing for Vicente. There was further part of the conspiracy that defendant Jesus Vicente Zambada, aka, I'm straight on all that, was a high-level member of the Sinaloa cartel and the Zambada Garcia faction and was responsible for many aspects of the cartel's operation. Vicente acted, among other things, as a logistical coordinator who coordinated deliveries of multi-kilo quantities of cocaine, heroin into the United States on behalf of the Sinaloa cartel. Also, Alfredo, same deal. Alfredo acted as a logistics coordinator who coordinated deliveries as well. Alfredo Compadre acted as a logistical coordinator as well. Juancho was a high-level member of the Sinaloa cartel and controlled the Culiacan Plaza, meaning controlling the flow of narcotics through the geographic area of Culiacan, Mexico for the Chapo faction. Juancho acted as a narcotics broker and logistics coordinator. All right. It was further noted that Germán Oliveras, he controlled the Juarez Plaza, meaning controlling the flow of narcotics through the geographic area of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And it was further, Felipe, last name unknown, was a heroin supplier who worked with and defended Ismael Zambada and the Zambada faction, who coordinated deliveries of multi-kilo quantities of heroin into the United States. So that was the heroin plug. Tomas, same old thing. He was a narcotics broker and customer for both factions. And the Flores Twins were narcotics customers of both Chapo and Mayo's faction, as well as the Beltran Leyva cartel, who purchased and distributed multi-ton quantities of cocaine, usually in shipments of hundreds of kilos at a time, and received from both factions simultaneously, as well as multi-kilo quantities of heroin in Chicago, Illinois, and elsewhere. Means and methods of the conspiracy. It was further part of the conspiracy that Chapo and Mayo and their factions, same old thing, South American countries, including Colombia and Panama, to the interior of Mexico using various means, including but not limited to Boeing 747 cargo aircraft, private aircraft, submarines, and other submersible and semi-submersible vessels, container ships, go-fast boats, fishing vessels, buses, rail cars, tractor trailers, and automobiles. Not to mention the Amores Perros style mules. You know what I'm saying? So who knows? It was further part of the conspiracy to the United States. They're just repeating stuff, y'all, including distribution to the Flores crew and others in the greater Chicago, Illinois area and elsewhere. They provided heroin to the Flores crew and others on consignment without payment at the time of delivery. Payment was subsequently made by the Flores crew and others on their behalf after some or all of the cocaine and heroin was sold to customers of the Flores crew. At certain times during the conspiracy, the Flores crew obtained and distributed from Chicago, Illinois, and elsewhere an average of 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms of cocaine per month and received some of that quantity, and at certain times all from Chapo and Mayo, and some of that quantity at certain times from their factions in the Sinaloa cartel. The Flores crew received the cocaine and heroin in greater Chicago, Illinois area. For other shipments, the Flores crew received the cocaine and heroin in the greater Los Angeles, California area, where truck drivers for the Flores crew transported the cocaine and heroin to the greater Chicago, Illinois area for further distribution. the Flores crew used several warehouse locations to unload and store shipments of cocaine and heroin received from the Chapo Mayo in the greater Chicago area. Several members of the Flores crew were responsible for unloading narcotic shipments, delivering the narcotics to one of several storage locations used by the Flores crew, separating narcotics deliveries into smaller amounts to be distributed to customers of the Flores crew, and delivering narcotics to customers of the Flores crew. Chapo and Mayo caused the delivery of large quantities of cocaine and heroin to members of the Flores crew for further distribution to customers in the greater Chicago area. The Flores crew sold the cocaine and heroin for cash to wholesale customers in the greater Chicago area, as well as to customers of Detroit, Cincinnati, Ohio, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York, Vancouver, British Columbia, Columbus, Ohio, and elsewhere. Wholesale customers in these areas further distributed the cocaine and heroin to other areas, including Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Flores crew were responsible for collecting and picking up payment for customers of the Flores crew, delivering this money to various storage locations used by the Flores crew, and counting and packaging the money, and reporting cash receipts to the Flores brothers. Members of the Flores crew and other co-conspirators counted cash narcotics proceeds and packaged them so that they would be delivered to couriers who would transport them back to Mexico. Members of the Flores crew then delivered and caused to be delivered millions of dollars in cash, narcotics proceeds to other co-conspirators, including members of the Chapo Mayo faction, who smuggled the proceeds back to Mexico in bulk, which is why Jay is telling them to put up checkpoints going into Mexico to catch that money. I mean, it doesn't mean they're going to do it. I don't think they're going to. They'd much rather say it's a terrorist state and go after them than put up those checkpoints. I believe that. That's for sure. The United States will spend the money on going to war over there than they will putting up checkpoints on the way out. Chapo Mayo and members of the Chapo Mayo faction transported and caused the transportation of large quantities of cash, narcotics proceeds from the location in the United States to locations in Mexico. Flores Twins routinely delivered large quantities of United States currency from the sale of cocaine and heroin to Chapo and Mayo of the Sinaloa cartel in one bulk shipment, without differentiating which portions of cash narcotics proceeds were in payment for a particular faction's cocaine or heroin. So he just sent the money in bulk. Y'all figure out, who I owed what over there, and that's it. The Flores crew maintained ledgers in paper and electronic form, which tracked information relating to the Flores crew's drug trafficking activities, including but not limited to amounts of narcotics received, money sent to Mexican sources of supply, including Chapo and Mayo, amounts of narcotics delivered to customers of the Flores crew, the courier and couriers responsible for particular deliveries to customers, money received from customers, and payments to members of the Flores crew. So these guys had a whole Fortune 500 company going on right there. Chapo Mayo and the Flores crew, possessed with intent to distribute large quantities of narcotics in the Northern District of Illinois, include to but not limited to the possession of narcotics seized by law enforcement officials as described below. June 5th, 2005, 398 kilos in Bloomington, Illinois. February 12th, 2007, 300 kilos, Naperville. Now these numbers is just what they was giving up and rolling up in this whole case, right? So I'm sure these numbers are low compared to what was really going on. And these numbers are already crazy. All right? June 5th, 2005, 398 keys. February 12th, 2007, 300 keys in Naperville. The 398 was in Bloomington. July 9th, 2007, 400 keys, Lockport, Illinois. May 26, 2008, 8 keys, Chicago. See, this is when they started getting the guys on the street, when the shit started trickling downhill. Illinois and South Holland, 8 keys. Melrose Park, 250 keys. Chicago, Illinois, 15 keys. But all of this, when y'all ask about these prices, these years, these times, these dates, this is why the prices were what they were. North Lake, 20 keys. Chicago, 8 keys. Chicago, 12 keys. This is November 14th, 13th. November 14th, 2008, 77 keys. Ontario, California, on its way to Chicago. November 15th, 2008, 86 keys. Same deal. They smashed up that Cali to Chicago connection right there. November 18th, 89 keys. So these things was getting hit one right after the other. By this point, how anybody involved didn't see it and just walk away. I wonder how many did. Currency seized by law enforcement. Here we go. April 14, 2008, $4 million. October 29, 2008, $4.7 million. November 4th, 2008, $4 million. November 17th, 2008, $1 million. November 22nd, 2008, $715,000. And November 25th, happy Thanksgiving, $4,770,000. Just one little bag just fall out and land in my lap. Acts of violence in furtherance of the conspiracy. The Chapo faction, Mayo faction utilized various means to evade law enforcement and protect their narcotic distribution activities, including but not limited to obtaining guns and other weapons, bribing corrupt public officials, engaging in violence and threats of violence, and intimidating with threats of violence members of law enforcement, rival narcotics traffickers, and members of their own drug trafficking organizations. So nobody was safe from the violence. It was further part of the conspiracy that Chapo and Mayo and their factions utilized various means to protect and further their narcotics distribution activities from rival narcotics trafficking organizations, including but not limited to the Beltran Leyva cartel. This means included but were not limited to threatening acts of violence to their wholesale narcotics distributors, including the Flores brothers. If they engaged in narcotics trafficking with rival cartels, including the Beltran Leyva cartel. All right? Violence was threatened upon the twins. They sought to obtain weapons from the United States and discussed the use of violence against American and or Mexican government buildings. They discussed the use of violence against these targets in response to the arrest by Mexican authorities of Mayo's brother and his anticipated extradition to the United States, and in retaliation for the respective governments' enforcement of their narcotics laws and in order to perpetuate their narcotic trafficking activities. The factions discussed the use of violence in the smoke, a coded term for Mexico City, Mexico, an area of Mexico in which narcotics trafficking was controlled by the Beltran Leyva cartel, so that public and government blame for such an act of violence would fall onto Arturo Beltran Leyva and the Beltran Leyva cartel. So they'll smoke you and then blame somebody else for it. All right? This is, again, a tactic. And everybody's out there picking and choosing, and I don't get it. The allegations of count 1, 2, and 3 of this indictment are realleged and incorporated by reference as if fully restated herein for the purpose of alleging that certain property is subject to forfeiture to the United States pursuant to provisions of Title 21, United States Code Section 853. As a result of their violations, all of these people, defendants herein, shall forfeit to the United States any and all property constituting or derived from any proceeds they obtained directly or indirectly as a result of the violations, and 2, any and all of property used or intended to be used in any manner or part to commit or facilitate the commission of the violations. The interests of the defendants jointly and severally subject to forfeiture to the United States pursuant Title 21 include but are not limited to $938,415,000 in United States currency, representing the estimated proceeds of defendants' narcotic distributions organizations. Son of a bitch. $938 million. Almost $1 billion right there, all right? So that was the wraparound right there. That was the Rico Suave right there. They put everybody together and they said this one talked to that one to do this. That one talked to that one to do this. Next thing you know, everybody going to jail.